Hello, it's Adam Cox here, also known as the Phobia Guru, and I'm doing a YouTube live mainly because I haven't done one for a couple of weeks and I just want to get back into it, but also because I'm creating a audio download, and the audio download is something I do a lot individually, one-on-one, but rarely do I do it as a download. Reason being is the swish pattern, or a variation of the swish pattern, is normally something I calibrate a lot with the specific ingredients of the individual, and I'll explain why. Normally, the things that make a stimulus, so if it's a simple phobia, for example, that might be a dog or a spider. There are certain things in NLP known as submodalities. Okay, whether or not the image is associated or disassociated. So, are they seeing the image through their own eyes, or are they seeing themselves as if they're someone else? Are they seeing it as a still image, or are they seeing it as a movie? There's all these kind of things that are unique to the experience of the person that has the intensity of the fear. So typically, what I tend to do is I'm asking them to rate their fear on a scale of 1 to 10, and then I'm asking them lots of different questions, and then I'm asking them to change how they think about those things very, very subtly and slowly to see if that ranking changes. Now, for someone to work with me one-on-one and have a phobia, of course, there is a high intensity of the fear in relation to the sensitizing image. Otherwise, they wouldn't be working with me. So, for example, let's say someone has a fear of spiders, for example. If they have an image in their mind's eye that makes them feel anxious, and typically I don't ask them to just kind of make an image in their eye. I say, look, can you think of the last time you saw a spider and got scared? Okay. Now, for them to do that, they've got to go inside their mind's eye and picture that spider. They have to do that because I'm asking them to go back to a time when they felt scared. So in order to feel the emotion, they've got to think of the exact thing that caused them to feel that anxiety. Then what I'm asking them to do is to tell me, do they see the image as if it's through their own eyes, or are they seeing it as if they're looking at someone in the image? Now, in every single case that I've worked with a client, they're looking at the experience through their own eyes. They're associated into that, which is why they still feel the anxiety even when they think of the memory. That's a crucial thing. The other key element I'm looking for is, and which is quite consistent, is the proximity. Okay? Generally speaking, if in the memory they are closer to the let's just call it the stimulus, and then that applies to all key things. If they're closer to the stimulus, then it means that the intensity of the anxiety is higher than if they are further away. So, for example, let's use the example of a spider. If the image is of them looking at their leg and a spider is on that leg, that tends to be a higher intensity of fear than if they are looking at a spider that was in the same room. And that's because the distance from themselves to the stimulus is one of the key variables that normally influences the level of anxiety. Right, all very useful information for me, because I now know that two of the central submodalities that are crucial for them to feel anxiety are that they see it through their own eyes and that the image feels closer. Okay? The third central thing that is very consistent for simple phobias, this isn't necessarily the case with situational phobias, but with simple phobias, it tends to be that it's a moving image rather than a still image. Okay, So generally, if for example, right now I ask you to think of a time where you saw someone juggling. Now, juggling tends to be a movement. So you might imagine someone juggling, throwing the balls, the skittles in the air. Therefore, that's a moving image in your head, okay? If you're into sport and I say, right, what's the best goal that you ever saw scored? You're going to see that as a moving image, okay? Not as a still image. Now, the movement is also quite crucial because in a lot of people with situational phobias, for the anxiety to peak, the stimulus is getting closer to them, okay? There's also an element of speed, okay? So going from not seeing the stimulus to seeing it very quickly tends to have a feeling of enhanced anxiety and quickly. So the reason why I'm saying all these things is because normally I would be asking these questions to a client one-on-one to build a criteria that for them to feel anxiety at the level that they would label it panic or severe anxiety, certain key things need to be there. And I'm using this because I now know that if I can change not what they think, but how they think about it, then I know that I can massively reduce the anxiety. So if we can have someone that rather than thinking about them seeing a spider through their own eyes, they imagine that they're seeing a spider in the room, but it's through the eyes of someone else that doesn't have a fear. Or sometimes I'll say, like, just imagine there's a floating camera in the room witnessing what's going on. Suddenly the anxiety goes all the way down, okay? If they are further away from the spider, so it's not close to them, anxiety goes down. If we make the image smaller rather than bigger, if we make it still rather than movie, all these things bring the anxiety down. So the goal for, in my experience, the Swish pattern to work for phobias, you have to treat it like it's an analog rather than a binary reaction, okay? So the key thing is there are certain metaphors that work quite well with analog metaphors, okay? So brightness, turning down the brightness, turning down the volume. Saying a mute button, for example, would be binary. There's either volume or not. An on-off switch, you're either seeing what's happening or you're not. Whereas brightness, if you turn down the brightness, it has a feeling of being analog, that we're grading it down. Same thing with volume going down. If we say the image is big and it shrinks down, shrinking makes it analog rather than digital or binary. So all these things are really useful because for me to make the Swish pattern very effective, what I tend to do is I have them have whatever their scale is on a scale of 1 to 10. Let's say it's a 10 out of 10 fear. I want to reduce that to something like 2 or 1, using the submodalities in an analog way so that it gets so low that it feels manageable. And then I replace it with the empowering, resourceful image that they can then access that resource. And typically, the resourceful version of them is in a disassociated state. So they're seeing themselves as if they're someone else. Very crucial because most people, when they think about memories, and I've worked with hundreds of clients now, so I see this pattern and I test this pattern. When they think of memories, generally they're accessing the memories in an associated way through their own eyes. And if I ask them about the future, and I say, right, can you imagine yourself, what does when you think about your holiday that you haven't been on yet, what does that look like? And generally, if it's something that hasn't happened yet, they see themselves in the image rather than through their own eyes, purely on the basis that it hasn't happened yet. So things that typically tend to be desirable or motivational tend to be disassociated, and things that tend to be highly emotional tend to be associated. Now, there are certain things that it's useful to be highly associated. Amazing memories, your fun, happy memories, Imagining the birth of your child or your favorite holiday, for example. You want those experiences to be associated, okay? If, however, something traumatic is happening, then you want that to be disassociated. You don't want to say that the memory never existed, but you don't want it to feel that it's happening in the present. And typically, if it's associated, it feels like it's happening in the present. So for me, we have to take that down to a level where it's still manageable, still associated, but then the replacement image that we're swishing from is an element of disassociation. So they want to move towards the end image. Okay. Now, it is very important for me that I credit where I take these things from. Although I'm quite happy to say I am a phobia expert because I work with phobia clients all the time and my track record is very strong. For me, I'm happy to credit where I've looked at techniques, tried them, tested them, and find that they work for me. So this specific approach has been influenced heavily by Richard Bandler. There's been several videos, several workshops where I've seen his techniques, and essentially his approach is to do two things. One, interrupt the pattern. Okay, it's very important that if someone is consistently, automatically, unconsciously, competently accessing a certain emotional state, you've got to interrupt that pattern, because otherwise that's going to be the default pattern that they go on. The second thing is that you have to have an element of reducing the anxiety before you replace the main image. And my variety of this has certain echoes, certain patterns, certain similarities to some of the approaches that I've seen Richard Bandler doing. So, although this is my version of it, there are certain things that I would say if you are interested in learning about how to, let's say, tackle phobias, it's well worth researching Richard Bandler and his approach. Okay, that said, this is going to be a step-by-step process to enable you, if you're watching this, or if you're listening to the audio download, to be able to take your fear, your phobia, and have it reach a point where we can change the pattern. Okay? Normally, by the way, I would be wearing a suit jacket. That's kind of my kind of general kind of style and branding for this kind of stuff. I'll be completely honest, it is hot in here. There is the light. It's already warm outside. It's a summer's day at the moment. Hence why I have a t-shirt on. So, let's get on with the download. My name is Adam Cox. I'm known as the Phobia Guru, and I'm the UK's leading phobia expert. Now, in this video, in this download, you're going to learn how to take your fear, reduce the anxiety, and give you the empowering alternative perception as to what success and reality looks like without your fear. Okay, so in order for this to work, what I want you to do is to think of a time recently where you experienced the very thing that caused your phobia. Now, typically there's going to be two main types of phobias. There's going to be a simple phobia where that thing is a physical thing that you actually saw. So if you have an animal phobia, maybe you did see that spider, maybe you did see that dog, maybe you did see that mouse, and that's what caused the anxiety. Or it could be a situational fear or phobia. Situational being that you had to evaluate what was going on in order to feel anxious. So if someone has a fear of flying, fear of public speaking, typically the cause for the anxiety is not the thing itself, but the thoughts about the thing. So for example, if you have a fear of public speaking, it might be the images that you make in your mind of you being on stage, or if it's a fear of flying, you might have an image of you being on a plane and the plane is not safe in some way. It could be turbulence or something like that. in all cases, in order for you to feel anxiety, what's likely to be the case is that there is an imagined image that you're experiencing. And it's quite likely that that imagined image is the cause of the anxiety. Now, one of the key things that I encourage people to accept as a belief system, and for me, it's been true in the people that I've worked with, and that is that it is not the thing itself that is causing the fear, but the associations and the thoughts you have about the thing. Because if, for example, it was spiders themselves that are causing your fear, then it means that everyone in the world should have the same reaction to spiders that you have, and yet they don't. If it was genuinely flying itself that makes people feel anxious, everyone would feel anxious about the idea of flying, and yet they don't. So I want you to really consider an alternative belief system. And that belief system is that it is not the thing itself, okay? And this really links to what we call locus of control. If it is the spiders, if it's the dogs, if it's the snake, if it's the mouse that's actually causing your fear, then there's very little that you can do about it. If, however, you accept that it is not those things in and of themselves, but the way in which you think about them that is causing your anxiety, then it's also completely plausible that you could think about those things in a different way and not feel anxious. And one of my goals to break a phobia in an individual is I ask them this question. And that question is, has there ever been a time that you have thought about this particular thing that causes you anxiety and not felt anxious? Okay. And if someone has a phobia, generally people don't forget to feel anxious. You know, I'll say, look, if you have a fear of spiders, have you ever seen a spider and just forgot to feel anxious? It doesn't happen. You know, have you ever been slightly different actually with situational phobias? Because if I say, look, has there ever been a time that you've been asked to speak and you didn't feel anxious? Well, because situational phobias are based on evaluation, there can be times where people say, right, well, if I know the audience, if they're friendly and that kind of stuff, then the anxiety is like, but if it's the key thing, let's say a big audience or an unexpected invitation to speak, the anxiety will always be there. And this is important. This is absolutely crucial because what I'm really looking for is for them to accept that they completely and consistently link anxiety with that particular memory, experience, or future eventuality. And the reason that's so important is because when, in a few moments' time, they experience the very same thought, the very same memory without anxiety, quite often, this is the first time they've ever experienced that. And I'll use the presupposition of trying to say, well, look, I want you to get to this level here and try and feel anxious. Now, here's the great thing. Trying has a presupposition of failure. So if they reach that point where they're still imagining the cause of their anxiety, such as a spider or a dog or whatever it might be, and they can't feel anxious, then they have evidence that it is no longer about the thing itself, and therefore has to be about how they've been thinking about it. And that then gives them the ability to choose consciously in that moment. Do they want a future where they are experiencing consistent anxiety for the rest of their life, or would an alternative future be more effective? Okay, so within this interaction now, here's what I want you to do. I want you to think of a recent time where the anxiety was caused either by something that you actually experienced or the thought process behind what you thought you might have to experience. And I don't want this to be the most anxious experience that you've ever had. That doesn't make sense at this point. We're going to find something that is maybe the second or third or fourth, or maybe a lowish level. So for me, I define panic as kind of like a level 9, level 10 anxiety around a particular fear, okay? Whereas if it's between, let's say, 6 or 7 or 8, or even a 5, 6, 7, 8, I would consider that anxiety. If, however, it's 5 or lower, then I would say that's discomfort. So I would suggest that you want to think of a memory or a thought that caused you around about a 7 out of 10 level of anxiety. The anxiety was definitely there, but it wasn't panic. Okay? Because if we can do this with something that feels relatively manageable, then the next time we do it, we'll do it perhaps with a level 8, a level 9, and then eventually we'll do it with the most highest level of anxiety that you've ever experienced. Because if we can take your most anxious memory that you've ever had about the thing that's been causing your fear, your phobia, and you don't feel a level 10 anymore, and we can get that down to a level 2 or a 1 or a 3 out of 10, suddenly we've drained the anxiety out of your most powerful experience, your most intense experience, and then replaced it with something where you have the resources to cope. Okay? So in this level 7, for example, here's what I want you to do. I want you to close your eyes and just imagine what that image looks like. And I want you to look at whether it is a still image or perhaps it's a moving image. Okay? Now, if it's a still image, I want you to kind of use your hands, not for my benefit because I'm not there, but for your benefit, to gauge how big the picture is. And here's the key thing I want you to do. I want you to pay attention to whether or not you're seeing that as if you're looking at it through your own eyes, which tends to be the case for most people with phobias, is that their most intense memories tend to be of them back in the moment imagining what's actually happening through their own eyes. Now, the key thing is, when you imagine this, you might feel a degree of anxiety. That's completely fine. But what we're going to do is we're going to help you to realize that this is not happening, it's happened. So one of the things that can be encouraging to do is to put a border around it. So if you put a border around it, that then helps you to identify it as, well, this isn't happening right now. This is a thought, this is a memory, and it's not happening in the real moment, if that makes sense. So imagine that level 7 experience, put a border around it, and here's what we're going to do. We're going to imagine that that is shrinking down, okay? Now the size is important, but also the feeling that it's getting further away. They're quite crucial, and these are consistent things that when working with lots of clients, this makes the anxiety feel lower. So what we're going to do is we're going to imagine that you've got this memory in your head. We're putting a border around it, and the border is useful because for a lot of people, if they're witnessing it through their own eyes, it doesn't tend to have edges. It doesn't have edges because real life doesn't have edges. And if you're looking at it through your own experience, then generally your real experience tends to have what you're focused on, and then your peripheral vision is normally quite blurry because that's how people's eyesight works and those kind of things. By putting on a border, it means that we can then kind of change the size and shrink it relatively easily. Okay, so here's what I want you to do. Think of that level 7 experience, put a border around it, and then shrink it down and imagine it's going further away. Now, one of the ways in which I do that is normally when I'm working with clients one-on-one, I've got a small coin, and the coin size that I use is a 5p coin because it's pretty much the smallest coin that I have around, and particularly in the UK, it's a very, very small coin around about that size. And I'll say, look, I want you to shrink down your memory, which is normally about this big, and I want you to shrink it down over to where I am, okay? And I'm normally about a meter or two away from my clients, and I say, well, look, I want you to shrink down your memory to the size of a 5p coin where I am, okay? So they're taking this border around the image and they're shrinking it down, but also it's going further away. And I'm also saying, while that's happening, I want you to drain all the color out. So normally the image, because it's going to feel lifelike, is in color and it's moving in the image that comes into their mind's eye. And we're going to shrink that down. And as we're shrinking it down, we drain out all the color and we make it smaller and we make it further away. Okay. But the crucial thing is, whatever was the cause of the phobia is still in that image. That's crucial. Now, if we take a life-size image about this big and we shrink it down to the size of a tiny coin. So if you're watching this, for example, in the States, for example, a 5p coin is quite similar to a dime, for example, or a penny, a small coin. So imagine shrinking it down to that size, further away, draining out the color, and then I'll check in and I'll say, look, now on a scale of 1 to 10, how intense is that fear? And for most people, if it started off at a level 7, the fact that it's still happening, but it feels further away, and it feels small, and it feels black and white, it tends to have reduced the fear from, let's say, a level 7 or a level 8 down to around about a 4 or 5. It's not completely gone yet because they're still aware of what's happening in that image, albeit that it is small. Okay? That's a crucial part of the process. Then what I do, and this is completely credited to Richard Bandler, but I imagine that on one side of the coin is black and on the other side of the coin is white. And I'll ask you, if I had a coin right now and I flicked the coin and it was black on white side, white on the other, what would be the overall color that you get a sense of? Now, because it's going from black to white so quickly, it would almost feel like it's gray, okay? And what I then do, because they've already imagined a rotating coin going from black to white very quickly, very rapidly, then I say, right, I want you to imagine that the image that you shrunk down to this tiny coin is then rotating black, white, black, white, black, white. And I make the noise, okay? That gives them, that paces this speed at which it goes from black to white. So black, white, black, white, black, white, super, super fast. And then I say, right, while it's going from black to white, almost like the brightness is full, so full it's really white, and then so low that it's really dark. White, dark, white, dark, white, dark, speed of a coin rotating, black, white, black, white, black, white. While they're doing that with the very memory that they're experiencing of their particular fear or phobia through their own eyes, at the point where it's going black, white, black, white, black, white, really bright, really dark, in their central image, the anxiety is normally gone down all the way to a 1 or a 2. There's still an element of it because they still, at some level, appreciate that the thing that's causing their fear is somewhere in this image, but they can't really figure out what it looks like because it's changing too quickly. This is the pattern interrupt part of the process. So if you're imagining your experience, put a board around it, shrink it down, and I get them to do this consistently, again and again and again and again, shrink it down further away, tiny coin, black, white, black, white, black, white. Right, while it's going black, white, black, white, what is the scale on a level of 1 to 10 of your fear you're experiencing right now? And quite often they'll say, right, it's a 1, it's a 2, it's a low level. That's enough for me. If I can get it around that 1, 2, even a 3 level, that's enough to make it manageable, okay? But we don't want it to end there because in real life, they're not going to imagine whatever their cause of their fear is to be shrinking down. The purpose of this is not that real life is like that, but that we've drained out the intensity of the anxiety to make it manageable. And there is a feeling of going from anxiety to neutrality to now the resourceful state that we want them to be in. That's really the purpose of it. So then at this point, I'm going to ask you, just as I ask my clients, can you imagine a time where you felt very, very confident, very resourceful in a situation where other people would have been anxious? Okay. Now, that's quite a useful thing. So, for example, I've had a client that he was afraid of spiders, but was confident around mice, for example. I've had clients that they're scared of dogs, but they're confident doing karaoke. By finding something, it means that they have that resourceful part within them. And then I'll get them emotionally associating into that particular state. Okay, that's really, really important. So what I'll say is, right, I want you to go back to that time where you felt confident in doing something that other people would have felt anxious about. Step into that version of you, and where do you feel that particular resource of courage? Now, typically, anxiety is down here in the gut level. Courage or confidence is normally around the chest area. Okay, so you get this weird dichotomy where when people are anxious, they feel the anxiety in their gut and they tend to breathe from the chest, like rapidly breathing up here, okay, almost like panting. And that's where the anxiety is. They feel the anxiety down here, they're breathing from here. When generally they're quite confident, they feel the courage and the confidence here around the heart area, but they tend to be breathing lower in their gut, okay? So quite often I'll ask them to put one hand on their chest, one hand on their belly, and say, right, when you're feeling anxious, where are you breathing from? And they're generally breathing from their chest, but feeling the anxiety in the belly. And then when I get them associated with the feeling of when they felt confident, they notice that they're feeling the courage, the confidence in their chest, but they're breathing from their belly. So that enables them to work out what they do differently. And I also can calibrate with them when they're in a courageous, confident state and when they're in an anxious state. Because generally, if someone's breathing from the chest, their shoulders go up. Okay? If someone's breathing from the diaphragm, there's very little movement in the shoulders. And I know that they're in a more relaxed, confident state. Not everyone knows naturally how to breathe from the diaphragm, but generally those people that are more relaxed tend to breathe more from that level than from the chest. That's really, really crucial because I need to know what confidence looks like in that particular individual. So I'm going to ask you to do this. I want you to remember a time that you felt really, really confident. I want you to imagine stepping into that version of you. Close your eyes, put one hand on your chest, one hand on your belly. Notice where you're breathing from and notice where the confidence feels like it's from. Now, it generally is in the chest area, but sometimes for some people it's in their head, or it kind of feels like it's surrounding the upper part, wherever it is. Sometimes people feel courage in the solar plexus or even slightly lower. Okay, so it's different for different people, but I want to know where you feel courage and confidence so that you can access that resource at the point where you need it. And then we're going to go back to the swish pattern. So far, you've thought of a memory that's caused you anxiety based on your phobia. You've imagined going towards the peak of anxiety, putting a border around the experience, shrinking it down to the size of a coin, and then rotating it, black, white, black, white, black, white, draining all of the key ingredients that's caused that anxiety. And then here's the crucial bit. I want you to imagine that somewhere within that tiny coin-sized memory, a tiny image is starting small and then getting really, really big. But that is an image where you see yourself like you're someone else, but with courage and with confidence, okay? Handling the very situation that used to cause you anxiety. So if, for example, it was a spider, through your own eyes, you might, for example, have this overall experience of, through your own eyes, seeing a spider feeling anxious. We put a border around it, we shrink it down, and then we drain all of the emotion out by going black, white, making it all black and white anyway. And then within that image, we're going to take a tiny image and make it really, really big, where you see yourself looking confident, actually handling and coping with the same memory that caused you anxiety. And when people see themselves looking confident, handling that situation, so they see the image of them coping rather than the cause of their anxiety, and I say, right, now on a scale of 1 to 10, what's your level of anxiety? Typically it's 0. It's absolutely 0 because it's no longer happening to them, but they're seeing themselves coping in the present tense, but as if they're someone else. Okay, really powerful distinction. And then, for example, let's say it was a dog or a spider. I'll say, look, when was the last time you imagined a spider or a dog and felt 0 anxiety? And for many people, that is the first experience of their entire life that they can recall where they've made an image of that thing. And the key distinction is the dog is still in the image or the spider is still in the image, but it is no longer through their own eyes. It's through the perception of someone or something else, and they're witnessing themselves coping in that environment, and therefore the anxiety is low. That's really, really important because once they've done that and they can see themselves coping, Then I'm going to ask them to do that same experience again, as I'm going to do with you, with a slightly higher level of anxiety. So think of your top 5 moments, for example, where you felt anxious around your memory. And all I want you to do is to do the same thing. As you feel like you're no anxiety, you're reliving the memory. As the anxiety starts to peak, border around it, shrink it down, make it black and white, drain all the color out, make it tiny, far away, black, white, black, 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 white, black, white. And then tiny image within that, make it really, really big, of you seeing yourself coping in the same memory. And that's step 1 of the swish pattern. Step 2 is we future pace that so you can actually see yourself in a future event. But this video here is the swish pattern for memories. So if you can break all your historical memories where you felt anxiety, then you lose the references to even prove that you have this fear. Because when you think about all your memories that have caused anxiety, you suddenly start seeing yourself coping, and coping in a courageous, confident way. And therefore, you start to create the belief system, or at least the faith, that you have the ability to cope and manage this. Okay? So this has been part 1 of the swish pattern. I hope it's been useful for you. Stay tuned for another video or another download where I'm going to explain the second part, which is actually doing it for things that haven't happened yet. Because, at the moment, it's fine to deal with memories. They've happened. But what if you know that you're going to be going to a zoo and seeing a snake, for example? Or what if you've got a flight booked and you need to go on that flight? You'll be thinking about something in the future that hasn't happened yet. And therefore, we need to be able to do the swish pattern with future events, as well as events that have actually happened in the past. Right? I hope this has been useful for you. And stay tuned, and we'll provide more content on part 2 of the swish pattern. Take care.